Wow, look at that.
Hello there, everyone. Welcome to the Headless Hour podcast. Today we have me, of course, Cornelius English, and my humble co-host, the King Plunder. But
Hello,
we
everyone.
also have, oh yes, and we also have a guest, our first ever guest on this new rendition of the podcast. His name is Ben Music. Ben, you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Ben Music. I'm very honored, but not too surprised to be the first guest on the Headless Hour.
This is
Uh,
true.
This is incredible. Oh, by the way, I want everyone to know that Ben Music is, in fact, a graduate student, so you can trust anything and everything that he says.
yes,
Exactly. On all topics, too.
I'm very happy to be representing my fellow humanities grad students here. Uh,
So
what what
tell me about your
what
background.
constitutes humanities? Actually, are you guys technically STEM people?
Um, I think econ is kind of in the middle of it because technically all I do is proofs, and then
Hmm.
it would basically be like an applied math degree, but then it's
Okay,
also a
cool.
social science, and you can do like experiments instead if you want to. So I'm a
Yeah,
little
That sounds
I
STEMmy.
mean, I would say that medical school is kind of similar to that. Of course, we do have that STEM kind of arm attached to what we do, but there's a vital kind of sense of humanities attached to caring for people, of course. And I would say that Ben Music, of course, given your name, Music is your last name. I'm assuming that you're a grad student at a music program. I'm assuming that there's a lot of, I guess, STEM concepts that come up while you're learning.
Yeah, I would say so. Even though what I do, unlike you guys, isn't really useful to anyone, we still like to think in algorithmic terms, like we're doing something
Wow.
important.
wow.
Wow.
At least on the grad student level, this stuff doesn't really percolate down to the undergrads.
Of
We
course,
wouldn't
no.
really expect them to understand.
They'll. I think they'll never catch up until they become grad students.
Yeah.
No, no, it's the great filter of education.
So you mentioned how you use algorithms in music. Do you care to expand on that?
Yeah, so what I do is because I'm a composer, it's much more like intellectual and different from other kinds of music. So the algorithm that we do is like kind of similar to a search algorithm where your heuristic is you consider all the music that people like and that is important to other people throughout history, and then you take whatever that is and don't do anything like that. You try and get away as far as possible.
That's very
So
interesting.
Wow.
yeah, you want to end up with something that's really important to you, but everyone else, if they heard it, they'd run away screaming.
I
So
think
that's what I do.
That's, I feel like, hearing that for the first time might come to as a surprise to a lot of people. But in general, I think that is the epitome
essence of
of being
art.
a,
It's the
it's
essence
yes,
of
it's a
art.
whole.
Yeah,
Yeah, it really
that's
is.
that's exactly right. Very good. You guys could be humanities grad students if you wanted to. I think
Exactly,
you have
exactly.
potential.
And I'm just thinking to myself right now, any MBA student listening, they are definitely blowing a gasket right now. That's for sure.
Oh
Oh
yeah.
yeah, yeah. If the
MBA
MBA
students,
students,
they don't know how to do anything in the humanities, right? They don't have the empathy for it, but they also can't do anything in STEM, right? They're
yeah,
kind of in this middle ground where they go to school, they meet a couple friends, they hang out at recess, and then they come home and they eat their lunch and go
Yeah.
back to
a
sleep.
total lost cause. I mean, what they're doing. I mean, the MBA student presumes that what they're doing is useful to society, but is just coping. They don't realize and go all in on it like the humanities students do.
It's very true. It's very true. I think I think an MBA student could benefit from actually taking a couple classes in the humanities,
Hmm.
Um besides, theater, right? Cuz we don't want to promote, satanic activities
No,
to our
no.
listeners, no. But real art like music, right? That's
Mm.
something an MBA student should try getting into, right? They can play guitar. You don't need to read sheet music for that, right? They can
Yeah, the
learn
guitar,
something.
it's perfectly designed for the MBA monkeys to pick up.
Exactly. Exactly.
I would highly recommend it.
If you ask the average guitar player, "Hey, I'm playing a 2-5-1 here. Do you want to improv over the changes?" What they'll do is they'll play the minor pentatonic scale in A minor, even though you're playing in C major, right? And this is something MBAs do when they talk to people in other fields, right? So, have any of you ever interacted with an MBA recently? I just want to hear any experiences there that may have come up.
Yeah, actually, I wouldn't say this is an opportunity, but I had the experience of texting one a couple of days ago,
Wow.
and uh, yeah, it really is just night and day. The type of conversations that you have with your fellow graduate students, with your fellow graduate students, you're talking about things that really matter, like reading
Success, money,
textbooks.
power.
Yeah, exactly. But when it comes to speaking with MBAs, it's infantile.
Yeah,
It is.
I can't remember the last time I talked to an MBA, and that's not even necessarily because I don't talk to many of them, but it's just so forgettable that I couldn't possibly remember how many.
Yeah, and your program doesn't have an MBA program, right?
No, so a little bit about me. I go to the most famous music school in the entire world. I'm not going to say what, but you can figure it out. And there's
Berklee College of Music, of course.
That's right. Exactly. Well, actually, I can't even laugh at that too much because the Berklee College of Music has a very heavy commercial and business emphasis, so I don't even want to really joke about that. It's kind of really in poor taste what they do. But
Of
yeah,
course.
no, we have no business program. We have no STEM program, Juilliard. We have no really anything that you can make money with or you can make other people's lives better. We don't do any of that. We do art.
Yeah, that is very cool. That's very cool. And I draw some parallels with arts, not having any use in society and academics, right? Because how many papers have I seen, right, that are about the same thing? And, like a week ago, I was reading a paper on the wage gap from 1971, right? And then a few weeks later, I read another paper on the wage gap in 1985, and then I read another paper about the wage gap in like 2019. And you see, they keep recreating the same things, and right, so you have those sorts of popular papers, right? Those are what you call the Justin Biebers of economics, right? But then you have, the true papers, an experiment on how sleeping 7 hours a night affects labor productivity that gets published in a journal of neuroscience instead of economics. Now that is jazz, right?
That's a very good point. I can make the same analogy with my own little field. The wage gap paper in 1970 and the wage gap paper from 2019. I mean, we've got Mozart Symphony 1, Mozart Symphony 2, 3,
Wow.
4. They're all the
Wow.
same.
It's
But
incredible.
if you dig a little deeper into Mozart's back catalog, you find his little-known chorale piece, "Lick My Ass." And by digging deep, you can find the equivalent of the good economy papers.
That is very
Wow.
true, and that's very profound too to hear that
Yeah,
coming from someone
these
like you.
are gems that you're dropping in this podcast right now, and I would say, we're talking about jazz. I would say podcasting is a lot like jazz when it comes to speaking to each other. What do you think about that?
I would say that's very true. I'm not an expert on jazz because that's more of a Berkeley kind of thing.
Mm.
But yeah, I would say that's about right. You got your walking bass line of all the static background noise. You got some scatting over the top. People taking solos and riffing. It's
Of
very
course,
jazzy.
a lot of people like to play outside sometimes. They like to bring up new topics that kind of throw things off.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, we got our grad student jump
Yeah.
rope Fauci 251, but occasionally you got someone coming in playing outside the changes, that A minor scale.
Wow.
Very true.
Oh yeah, very very true.
These analogies are blowing my mind right now. I have to
It's
say,
high level stuff.
it's high level.
It is very high level stuff.
Yeah.
A lot of people, I'm guessing, are not gonna understand this, and rightfully so, because not everyone is a grad student.
Yeah. I would say podcasting is like the jazz of audio
It,
on a broader level. Yeah.
I really think it is, right? Because you have so many kind of underground artists who churn out great work like us, right? We come on here with no script, maybe a couple ideas, and then we simply go and we solo, we riff, we play outside, and the people love it, all 25 of them, right? And that really is jazz.
Oh yeah. Call me John Coltrane.
So speaking of art, and as a graduate student, we're practically Renaissance individuals. We do a lot of things. We work out, we read primary sources, we take tests, but we also dabble in art. And as I was saying before, as a medical student, there is a portion or a capacity of humanities that I learn about. Now, I personally do like writing. I'm currently writing a book right now. You'll probably see it in the shelves in a year or two. It's a book that delves deep into the psyche of humanity and how losing friends can sometimes lead to obsession. So speaking of art, there was one thing that I was toying with. There was this character in my book who is a obsessed composer. And I'd like to read you an excerpt. It's just a single paragraph, 3 sentences, and I'd like to hear your thoughts about it.
I'd love to hear it.
Absolutely. So the paragraph goes, granular notes on a page became the essence of life, and Playboy R, his name is Playboy R. I don't want to reveal the full name just because the book is not in shelves yet, but you'll get that later.
Gotcha.
But Playboy R handled such notes with laser-like precision. Each strum of a string or a tap on a keyboard meticulously planned and perfected to the point of unhealthy obsession. He was a faceless mogul in his field, an artist lost in a sea of passion, blackened by the blood of obsession. Work with you, he asked. And to give you context, he was asking a sort of lower-ranking musical artist who goes by the name of Neotect.
Wow.
Yeah, I guess. What are your thoughts on that? In terms of like obsession and being so dedicated to the craft.
It's a tricky question because I think the notion of obsession is a really romantic one, where I think sometimes when people are thinking about art, they have this idea of the tortured genius who has to wait for inspiration and it kind of obsessively tailors his lifestyle to that. To some degree, this can be true, but really, it's being a high-level graduate student musician is no different than being a high-level graduate student economist or doctor in training, I presume, where you get up and you cook, you go to work. It's about the grind, and it's about sitting in front of your computer with your grad student beverage of choice, and going to work, and the inspiration will come no matter what you do.
As that is very profound and truly a relatable sentiment indeed. So you speak of, sort of the perception of art, right? Or what art truly is. And we compare that to us being grad students. And last episode, we gave our full breakdown, right, on our daily routines. And I want to hear from you, what is your daily routine like as a music grad student? And, maybe tied into how art is created,
Sure. So the first thing I do, I wake up really ready to go, and I make sure I'm ready to go because I start my day by jumping rope. This is very important to me.
Incredible.
Wow.
Incredible.
I was doing this even before I heard you guys saying it. I think it's just something that all graduate students everywhere converge on as a natural conclusion.
It's the standard. It's the standard.
It's how the mind wakens itself.
Yeah, it's perfect. So after about an hour of doing that, I leave my room. I live in a very small apartment, so I have to jump rope in my bedroom. So I get out of
Very
my bedroom and I go straight to campus where I go to the library and I cook. And then after that, I come back home and I drink a lot of alcohol and then I go to sleep and do it again the next day. That's pretty much it. It's not very complicated. I know what I want.
That is very impressive. That is very, very
and
impressive.
and you knowing what you want, I feel like that was something that some people can skip over. You knowing what you want is what separates you from the MBA students, because they
That's
don't know
very
what they
true.
want.
Yeah,
They rely on other people to tell them what they want. That's what you call networking.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
that's true. I make sure never to talk to anyone or network in any capacity.
You know, the struggle, I think, maybe in a school that's made for art, right, is as a musician, you're kind of like the stem of the art schools, right? You are the big dog. However, there there's people at these art schools, who they decide that what they want to do and pursue is to play pretend, right? So these are the actors.
Mm.
Do you know any actors? Do you speak to them? What's your experience with them? And should we be worried about them changing our children's minds about cultural attitudes?
Well, okay, so God forgive me for saying this, but I actually happen to live with an actor.
Oh,
Very,
And
very scary.
wow.
this question is really hard to answer because how could you ever know if they're telling the truth? They could be acting.
It's so true.
I struggle to answer this question. On the surface, it seems pretty benign, but I can imagine that they're all acting. Who knows?
that is
Wow.
that is truly the
I mean,
scariest thing I've
you,
ever heard.
I don't actually, I'm not actually sure if there's an acting department at Juilliard or if they're just making it up. I've never seen any of the classes. I've never been there.
It's possible the professors don't have degrees or just
Yeah,
pretending.
they are probably pretending.
Yeah, I mean, you hear Adam Driver saying that he's a Juilliard graduate, but this guy
Mm.
also says that he's like the leader of the First Order and like a Jedi. So how can you believe him?
Yeah.
Yeah. And
He-
he was also in the military, right? He might be CIA as well.
Just another knock on his credibility.
So
that's incredible. I actually never really thought about that, but you're right. Actors are always acting. So can they be trusted? Because even if you go to a graduate level acting school, is it all just people role playing?
Yeah, it means they're less trustworthy. I mean,
Yeah.
if you went to like an MBA theater production, you could probably guess pretty easily the secrets that they're hiding.
Yeah.
But if you go to a Juilliard acting performance, you can sit there in the audience and think like, are they even acting right now? Is this a performance or are they just acting? It's really hard to draw the line. That's why we don't associate with them too much. But I do
I
live with
see.
an actor, and he seems very nice, but I can never tell.
yeah, he's probably playing the roommate role pretty well, I would assume.
Mm.
Oh yeah, he does a great job.
So even within acting, there's there's people who do different types of acting, right? And I think one of the worst ones are improv actors, right? They
Mm.
they run around town, they have conversations with you. Later you found out the whole thing was a ruse, right? They were just playing pretend. They were just leading me on in this conversation by making up stories, right? And I think that's gross, right? I think no one should ever do that. And I think
Yeah,
it's
it's
yeah,
dishonest.
It's
It's not cool.
dishonest, and people, yeah, it makes me, it gives me hives when I hear about people doing that, just talking about things that, like, yeah, no, that shouldn't happen.
People who improvise aren't even being honest with themselves because they don't know what they want. They change from moment to moment. If the
Mm.
person that's proctoring their improv session tells them to like bark like a dog, they have to do it.
that's so
It's
true.
crazy.
And
I mean,
they also take notes from the audience, right? The audience at some of these shows and real life. They can shout out prompts, right? Like, hey,
Mm.
my dog died today. And suddenly the humble improv actor is playing pretend, giving you condolences when it's all
Very
just a game to
patronizing.
him. It's all just a game to them, really.
I know. If someone came up to me and they knew that my dog had died and they said sorry, my first thought is, are you an actor? Why are you telling me this?
That's what happens at these art schools. You can't trust who's an actor and who's not. It's rough.
It's a hard place to be sometimes, for sure.
And
And
I think bringing it back to being a graduate student, of course, when we're a graduate student, our schedules are so incredibly intense. It kind of saves us from having to speak to people and worry about them acting. So, for example, if I'm reading a textbook well, in medical school we actually learned this thing. So when you read textbooks, it actually burns the protein in your brain. So it's
Oh
always
wow.
an incredible idea to have like a protein shake or like raw meat, liver next to you while you're while you're reading a textbook, so you can devour that. On top of
Brain
that,
fuel.
yeah, exactly. On top of that, what is one thing that every human needs? It's water, right? And
That's
when you're
true.
reading textbooks, I don't know, you might have felt this before. You might have, like, any graduate student listening, you might have felt this before, but when you read textbooks, you know that little like sizzling that you feel in your brain after you've done like a 6-hour session of reading
Oh
textbooks.
yeah. I can
You
hear
know
it
what that
sometimes.
is? Yeah, you know what that is. That's the water molecules in your brain burning to a crisp.
wow.
So it's
Wow.
important that we keep a gallon of water next to us every single day. But I digress. I want to bring it back. Being a graduate student, reading those textbooks, it saves us being from having the problem of speaking to random passerbys and telling them our stories of the day and having their sympathy when it's entirely fake. It's acted. It's improvised.
That's right. That's very true. I need
Actually,
I need to take a moment to chew on that.
Yeah.
there's actually a, a comparison to be made about the art student's experience, being wary of actors, and sort of a student at a normal school, a grad student at a normal school, being wary of who is attending the MBA networking convention and who isn't,
Mm,
right? Because often I
Oh,
walk
that's
through the
true.
hallways and I see this big gathering of folks, and suddenly
yeah.
people are coming up to me. They have their name on their chests. They're saying all these nice things to me, right? And later I find out those are just MBA students,
Mm.
networking with one another.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think that's
So,
This
a pretty good point. You can really nitpick and identify the similarities of an improvised actor and a MBA student. They're really in it just for themselves.
they are. They
so
are,
I have a question for you, Cornell English major.
of course.
Uh, so as an econ student, you think a lot about money.
Of course.
But guess who also thinks a lot about money? The MBA students.
Oh
Mm.
yeah, they
So
do.
I understand why you have a hard time trying to separate the wheat from the chaff here when you're talking to people. So what makes you, the econ student, different from an MBA student, and how do you avoid interacting with these people at all costs?
So this is what I'll say, right? There is a lot of crossover, right? So first thing I'd like to make clear, if you are an undergrad economics student, you're a fraud. You're a failure and you're lying to yourself if you say that you're on my level, right? And if you haven't taken real analysis, don't talk to me because you don't know how to, prove anything, right? So maybe whatever you tell me is wrong, right? I can't trust you in that case.
MBA
And then
MBA majors do fake analysis.
they do. They do fake analysis. They've actually never taken multivariable calculus, a lot of them, right? So ultimately they're frauds. And if they've taken maybe an undergraduate economics major, which a lot of them have, of course, basically they learn these models with so many, simple and strict assumptions that are made for the undergraduate mind to sort of grasp. And because they don't have the mathematical maturity to really discuss these topics at a high level, they end up deciding not to pursue a PhD. You know, the real reason is they feel like they can't hang with people like me, right? So they have to go into consulting or become a financial analyst or whatever. And then they decide, you know, maybe I will do grad school, but I can't do the real thing, right? Let me do an MBA program and sort
Interesting.
of just hang out with my friends. You know, we can pretend we took game theory, but really it's the master's course game theory, which is made for like 4-year-olds to understand. So there's that.
Yeah,
But
I
yeah.
mean, I don't know who they're fooling. If you take a course like game theory and you're trying to claim that you're not working, you're having fun. You're having fun in game
You're
theory
having fun.
class.
It's very
Yeah.
true.
You're
They're
not, your nose
they're
isn't to the
learning.
grindstone. You're, you're learning about Monopoly and Jenga.
That is so true. You know, I've heard in game theory classes at the MBA level, they play Monopoly, right? They don't even
You're
play
like
chess.
playing Plants vs. Zombies.
Wow.
It's sad.
That's
It's sad.
incredible. And you know, actually, when I was one of those filthy undergraduate students, I would say
Okay,
that
hold on, wait. Let me stop you right there for a second.
Sure.
You weren't an undergrad student. You were a future grad student.
You know, yeah,
It's important to think in these terms. Carry on.
That's 100% true. I appreciate you for that, Ben Music. But of course, when I was a future grad student, I had a lot more time on my hands, and I would get the opportunity to observe the future MBA students, the future dredges of our society. And when you're talking about game theory, it's 100% true. One of the future MBA students that I was with at the time, for his final sort of classwork, it was entirely a game. They were playing like a role-playing game where they were like an ice cream company. Meanwhile, I was in the library reading textbooks, applying to graduate level programs. It really is just night and day at that point.
It really is. It really is. And I actually have a somewhat similar experience. When I was when I was a future grad student, of course, I initially majored in econ, right? I took the classes with some future MBA students. And then I went on and I double majored in mathematics, where I really blossomed. And I took a lot of classes with individuals who didn't know how to socialize, so we could all focus on the task at hand, right? And later on, I decided, you know, I'm applying to grad school. Let me take some master's level, not real grad school level, some MBA essentially level economics classes. And I was in these classes with these students and I saw them. I saw them in the act. All right. It was truly a profound experience because they were asked questions like the Microsoft Antitrust Act in the 90s. You know, do you think that was do you think the case was decided correctly? And all these people, without any experience in law, without any knowledge of the case, they would read about one Wall Street Journal article worth of summary on the topic, and then they would discuss at length for 2 weeks whether or not this case was correctly decided, and they would all confidently give an answer. And it was truly really interesting to see the kind of the pathology of an MBA student.
Yeah, I think the MBA is like the Wall Street Journal opinion section of academia. What more needs to be said? It's sickening to me.
Yeah, it really is. It really is.
Not even the Chicago Tribune opinion section.
All right, so now we're back. We took a brief break to, you know, refill on coffee and sort of energize the mind for further discussion. Because as the King Plunder was saying earlier, right, these high-level discussions between grad students, they take up a lot of proteins in the head, and you need to, you know, energize yourself to continue. So
yeah, I got my gallon of water here with me. I'm ready to go, knowing what I know now.
I was gonna say, Cornelius, doesn't one of our sponsors have a lot of protein?
Oh yeah. Our wonderful sponsor, who hasn't yet accepted our request for sponsorship, but they will. Don't worry.
It's only a matter of time.
My protein, my favorite protein shake. I like to drink the lemonade flavor because I love lemonade. It has 20 grams of protein. I
Wow.
think only 80 calories. And as a medical student, how many calories are in 1 gram of protein? Tell me right now. It's 4 calories, right? So,
I did not know. I have
so you
no
end
clue.
up with 100% isolate protein. It's very incredible. It's great stuff. I recommend it to all of our listeners. Really, you want to buy My Proteins, whatever they have. I like the lemonade flavor in the way isolate. You can get the whatever other type you want. But yeah, My Protein. We also want to request Alpha Brain to sponsor us because I would like to try Alpha Brain. I haven't tried it yet, but I'm sure it's wonderful.
Thank you in advance, My Protein and Alpha Brain, and Cornelius for giving us a chance to work out our deductive skills, figuring out calories per gram of protein.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's always good to keep up with the basics.
Yeah. And speaking of the basics, right? In music, a lot of the greats are foundational, right? So at certain schools, maybe an art school, you would learn about the classics, you'd learn about your Mozart, you'd learn about your Bach, you would learn about your Radiohead. And these are all,
yes.
classically trained musicians,
The greats.
and they really do the basics, right? And so how much do you think hammering down the basics will give you, success in life and whatever you decide to practice?
Well, I think you need to have a little bit of both. I think you need to learn the basics. I think you need to know your Mozart and your Radiohead. But to really differentiate yourself from the pack, you've got to have not just a good understanding of the craft, but also a good understanding of fresh ideas and more experimental sources and how to inject some spontaneity and personal flair into your own music. So it's really good to know what's on the cutting edge and who might be just coming up. One artist that I've gotten into recently to stimulate myself experimentally is this act called Tame Impala.
Oh,
You
very
guys, I don't expect you to have heard of this band, but I think you should give
Yeah.
them a chance just to see what's happening on the cutting edge right now.
I've heard good things about this band. It's they have a few albums out, and all I know is that only select individuals, probably future graduate students, are listening to the band Tame Impala.
They're
Yeah,
extremely
I mean,
underground.
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I've heard rumors that it's only one guy, but
Really?
I
It's
haven't
true.
Wow.
It's true.
I
It's
haven't
just
really
one
looked
guy.
into it, but like maybe the less I know, it'll be a lot better for me in the long run.
Yes. Yeah, I can drop another Tame Impala fact on you if you want. They're actually the first they're the first guy to use a guitar in a rock song.
Wow,
Wow.
They were the first guy to combine guitar with rock.
that is really interesting stuff. Actually,
And this
I
is
didn't
and
know that.
synthesizers too. This is the kind of
Mm.
experimental stuff that I'm talking about.
Wow.
You get
And
beyond your Radiohead where it's just
yeah.
5 guys wailing at the top of their lungs.
Mm.
It's a great formula, but it's been done before. And then you get people like Tame Impala, one guy, using guitars, taking it to the next level. That's what being a graduate student's all about.
That's interesting to me. I'm wondering, Radiohead is a staple in our culture, and it's like 5 people, right? I'm wondering how Tame Impala manages to do what Radiohead does better if they're only one person. Do they have multiple
okay.
hands where they're playing multiple instruments at the same time?
Easy answer. Do you think 5 MBA students could do what you do? Boom.
That is profound.
That is compelling. That is wow.
Very, very true. I think that is impressive.
Only a
So-
musician would be able to make that connection, by the way.
Oh yeah.
Really,
course.
yeah.
So when you're experimenting, with a song, you really want to balance, do I care about the listener? Do I care about myself? Earlier in the episode, you mentioned that you really want to make something for yourself, actually, and not for the listener. But I saw an Instagram reel once where I
Mm,
heard that the first listener is
always the
yourself.
player.
That's
Exactly. The
true.
player is
Hmm.
the first listener. So is that really what you were trying to tell the audience today?
Well, you have to have standards. There's no way you can separate completely your own ego, the art of your creation. So you need to have the one listener. But anyone else outside of that, forget about it. I mean, it's not important. If you're trying to please other people, it's not art. You're commodifying yourself. It's
Very interesting.
it's undergrad behavior, frankly. And I mean, not only do you not want to care about the listener, you don't want to care about the people who are performing your music. You want to be as unkind to them as possible, not pay them anything because you probably, as an artist, don't have the money to expend on such petty things. And what you do give them to play, it needs to be as difficult as possible for them to play and understand.
Yeah,
So at the end of the day,
exactly.
a good heuristic for making successful classical contemporary music uh, is does someone else like it? And if so, maybe you should have a think about that.
That's very interesting, actually. So I think what you're saying, to some degree, is music that's that has a lot of plays on, let's say, Spotify, high ratings from Rolling Stone magazine, things like that. Those songs, those artists, they're kind of frauds in a way, and
Mm.
real artists, they would be maybe not even listed on the chart. They might be on rateyourmusic.com instead. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think you're gonna have to forget about your forget about your Rolling Stone, forget about your Wall Street Journal opinion section. You're gonna have to go to sites like Rate Your Music, and maybe even the Mew board of 4chan, where
Oh
nobody
yeah.
nobody knows anything that's going on in these places, which makes it so valuable what their opinions are.
Yeah, of course.
I personally have no listeners anywhere, so I'm feeling great.
Well, you do have yourself, so you have
Yeah.
the one listener you need.
Yeah, the most important listener, of course. Yeah.
Speaking of this, I mean, speaking of listeners, this podcast actually would like listeners. So if you want to send this to your mom, your dad, your cousin, your friends, your family, your fiance, your wife, maybe your neighbor or someone else, then I urge you to send it to them immediately at this moment in this podcast. All right,
Please.
going back to the discussion. So music, in many ways, it's a collection of sounds.
Mm.
Now, whether these sounds should sound good, well, that's kind of up to whatever your own opinion is. But what I would say is that music should be a collection of sounds in patterns and orders that are, more difficult to come by. What are your guys' thoughts on this premise?
I want to hear from the medical student. I want to get a fresh opinion from a non-music grad student about this.
Sure. That's a loaded question. Could you repeat that?
Oh yeah, of course. So some people say
Yeah.
that music is a collection of sounds, right? So
Yes.
let's accept that premise. Moving forward, let's assume that music is a collection of sounds that should either be, pleasant, depending on
Mm.
one's opinion of how it sounds, or should it be a collection of sounds that are difficult to come by, difficult to create, maybe
Mm.
difficult to arrange together, in a pattern that isn't that common.
Yeah.
Is that what music should be, or should it be something that's pleasant? What do you think?
I think it's definitely contextual, case by case in that moment. Right now, particularly as a medical student, we are learning about the auditory system. It's very interesting how a collection of vibrations really produce such beautiful and life-changing experiences in our brains. Now, when it comes to sounds that come together that are just plain pleasurable, or something that you like, versus sounds that are unique sounding and might not sound nice to the eye, not to the eye, to the ears. I really do think that's case by case.
The ear
Sometimes
is the face's eye, after all.
yeah,
That's
exactly.
true. That's true.
And sometimes, when I'm reading a textbook, or especially when I'm jumping rope, I want something that has the same beats per minute as when I'm jumping, right? Because I want to be in sync with the music that I'm listening to, because I feel like it is a placebo, but I feel like it helps me when I'm trying to burn off weight, or just work out in general.
So
But
so
it's times when
might I insert right
sure,
here?
absolutely,
So you say you like to jump to a certain BPM, right?
yeah,
And I think a key signature would be interesting here. So let's say
mm,
you're jumping rope to a Tool song. Do you
yep.
do you jump rope to the key signature that Tool is using? Often it's not in 4/4.
Yeah,
Sorry, I'm a music major. I have to correct you. This is a time signature that we're
Oh yes,
referring
time
to.
signature, of course.
mm,
I want to make sure we keep the story straight here.
absolutely. That's why you're here. That's really why you're
Yes.
here.
Yeah.
You're a
I'm here to jump in when I hear key signature instead of time signature.
yeah,
Exactly,
and you're a professional in the field. You know pretty much everything there is to know because you're a grad
Yeah,
student.
you'd be surprised how often I have to do this in everyday conversation. It happens
Wow.
all the time.
Yeah, makes
Wow.
sense.
Sorry, I digress.
Yes. So while I'm jumping rope, if I'm listening to something like Tool, or something just in general esoteric to the common public, I think that time signatures, am I saying that correctly? It's time signatures, right?
That's right. Very good.
I think time signatures sort of dissipate in my brain, and I enter a trance state where I'm listening to the music. I'm not in sync with anything. The only thing I'm in sync with is my wanting to be the best at what I do.
That's
Wow.
inspiring. That's powerful.
That is really heavy stuff right there. I'm gonna have to take that in for a moment.
And I'd like to bring into the discussion a popular noise music artist. I think they go by the name Merzbow. Is that how I pronounce it?
Oh yes,
Yeah.
I believe it's
Yeah.
something like that. Yeah.
And any listener who wants to get into a trance, forget what they are doing, forget about their day, and just jump rope, I would highly suggest you listen to them.
There was a period during my life where I would listen to Merzbow 24/7.
Wow.
This lasted about 3 years, and I came out on the other end a much better musician for it.
Yeah. I mean, they really teach you something about texture, about, playing outside, almost all the time. You know,
Yeah,
I think I think Merzbow to, someone who does maybe math problems would be a
Mm,
great asset in sort of clearing the mind of the rest of the static and introducing this sort of um induced static, which can put you in the mindset to really knock out some very difficult problem sets.
hmm
for sure. I thought what you said earlier about matching the level of patterns in your between your music and your life, I thought that was very compelling. Because sometimes I like to think of music algorithmically.
Mm.
We were talking about this before on the show, but to bring
Comes
in
full
some
circle.
concepts. Oh yeah, to bring in some concepts from computer science, which is a thing I study in my undergrad. Uh, think of different sorting algorithms. So you've got your people like your MBA students who need very simple music because they won't be able to get anything out of the more complicated things.
Yes.
So you want to compare the complexity of the music you're crafting for these people to maybe your bubble sort, or perhaps your selection sort.
Mm.
And then for people like the graduate students of the world, You want to get into things that are more difficult to understand, like your radix sort or your merge sort.
Very
I
interesting.
Yes.
So
So these are your like your Milton Babbitts or your Xenakises or your Tame Impalas
Mm.
to bring it back.
I do want to ask, so when you take comp sci courses at a university, do they teach you C first? Is C what they start with?
I went to Indiana for my undergrad, and they have this really fucked up computer science program where they teach you everything in Dr. Racket. This is totally serious. It's like the music of computer science. It's completely useless.
Wow.
Very, very interesting. So,
And
so
wait, sorry to interrupt. Doesn't Indiana that has a very famous MBA program there, right?
They do. The Kelly School of Business.
Wow, that's telling. That's telling.
Yes, it is. There was occasionally, I feel bad for even saying this, but I had to go near Kelly a lot in my travels in Indiana to get the
wow.
computer science building. And you could tell when you were in Kelly territory because you crossed the road, and all of a sudden everybody would be carrying a briefcase and would have a Bluetooth earpiece. And most tellingly, nobody would be jumping rope.
That is
And
so true.
I sped walked through those blocks of campus.
It's unsafe.
Yeah, I mean, I'm shuddering even thinking about
Yeah.
it. I'm surprised I'm still talking to you now with all the time I had to spend there.
You know, an MBA student with a briefcase is kind of like, a criminal with a gun, right?
Yeah, what's in there?
Yeah, like it's probably notes for their next conversation they're gonna have.
Probably a napkin with a drawing of a Laffer curve on it. Something disgusting
yeah.
and vile that
What I think it is I think it's the prisoner's dilemma, right? And even though we know that they should, they're ultimately going to both snitch, and they're going to end up at the bottom right square that has 1-1 instead of 5-5 at the top left. They are all going to try and concoct an argument for why 5-5 is a Nash equilibrium, and they're wrong. They're just wrong about this.
MBA students would never collaborate. They would always defect. It makes me want to defect even thinking about it. It's disgusting.
Of course. And speaking of defection, so this country has had a series of awful combats throughout history, one being the Vietnam War.
That was the excellent segue. This is inspiring.
This is what I do for a living these days. So I really work on my craft.
Yeah, I was just thinking the other day when I was thinking about the prisoner's dilemma. I was like, "Wow, this reminds me of the Vietnam War."
Yeah, it really does, because in that scenario, everyone wants to defect, right? The only people who
everyone
don't
dodge the draft. Yeah.
And actually, it's an independent, repeated game infinitely, because you end up having, actually maybe not infinitely, because you have a population that would probably cap it. So N, in that case, N equals the population of the United States. And most people, most graduate students defected, or they had bone spurs. Whereas more of the Chad folk, more of the industrial gentlemen, they decided to cooperate. They decided to go. And that is very interesting, I think, about, seeing mindsets between different types of people. I often say economics is the psychology of economics. And that is
that is so true.
You couldn't have said it any better, Cornelius.
Yeah. And I think sociology is the economics of sociology,
Man,
that's a lot to chew on.
Yeah. It's kind of like how chiropractors are the doctors of chiropractors.
Chiropractors are the MBA of medicine.
I'd agree. I'd like to, I'd like to hear from a musical grad student what your thoughts on chiropractors are.
Oh, geez. I mean, what is there to say about chiropractors that hasn't already been said about Radiohead? Uh, I don't know. I'm having trouble.
You know, I once took an infant to a chiropractor. You know, this
Mhm.
is this is
As you
this is
do.
one of those wild infants you see in the street somewhere.
Yeah.
And I caught one, right? So I
Yep.
took it to the chiropractor because I thought its back was a little screwed up, and they killed it, right? So what I saw in that moment was
What else could you do? I mean,
yeah. If you see an infant on the street, you should take it to the chiropractor. It's only right.
Exactly.
that's what
There's
my
nothing
that's what
else
my
that you could
parents
do.
always told me.
Yeah.
But they still couldn't accomplish the one thing they were supposed to do, which is straighten this situation out, right? They straighten things out. That's their job. And I asked them to straighten one thing out.
And they failed. They
They
failed.
They
And the
failed.
reason why is
Now
because
they have blood on their hands.
exactly. But is anything going to happen? No, because they hide behind a facade, telling people that they, just like MBA students, are reading textbooks. Or I shouldn't say just like MBA students. I'd say that they're lying or coping just like MBA students and saying that they read textbooks and things like that. I'll
I
tell
think
you
chiropractors serve the niche of people who don't realize how much could be cured by just a simple outing with the jump rope.
That is so
that
very true.
that is 100% true.
I actually, in the last episode, I talked about how I broke my foot jumping rope, and then I fixed it by jumping rope some more.
Yeah.
And something that happened to me recently was I actually tore several ligaments in my knee while jumping rope. And what happened was I realized, this is going to really, really hurt my ability to jump rope now. And so what I did was I took a day off, I collected myself. The next day I went back to jump rope, and slowly but surely my knee began to sort of mend itself, kind of
Yeah.
like in Harry Potter when they use one of those spells. And I'm thinking, maybe your mindset is the magic from movies, right?
Movie magic.
Yeah. Maybe a positive mindset towards productivity is something akin to sort of, magic from Harry Potter or The Lord of the Rings,
I'm willing to bet this is the first thing you learn in medical school. Am I right about that?
I was just about to say that. That's 100% true. We can talk about all of the articles, the journals, the meta-analyses that have shown how there is a positive correlation with a mindset, like a positive mindset and magic. But it's something that you will never believe, looking at statistics and things like that. You'll never believe unless you try it. And once you do try it, and I would say that the best tool or the best pathway to achieving this sort of mindset is through jumping rope. But once you do, the conversation changes, your life changes, and people start taking notice.
I was reading a very interesting applied microeconomics paper on this topic, right? So what they did is they ran an experiment in which they took several folks and they essentially measured them half before they were doing, the activities that would be done by someone with a positive mindset. And then they had them do these things with a positive mindset, and they tracked them over a period of time. And then they implemented what's called staggered differences in differences. And by using this methodology and maybe some fixed effects in there, you find that people who have a positive mindset end up achieving much higher labor productivity outcomes. And I think that's something that all the alpha male YouTubers have been saying for years, and we refuse to listen to them.
I can corroborate this result 100% because when I started jumping rope, I mentioned I do this in my bedroom, right? I jump rope for 1 hour every morning. And I go really, really hard. I make sure the neighbors below me can really hear because I'm stomping really hard on my floor.
Yep.
And now when I leave my apartment to go to campus in the morning, my neighbor, when I go down, the floor on the stairs, they'll come out of their door they'll scream something at me in Spanish. I don't understand, but I can only assume they're jealous of my productivity moving forward.
Yeah, and I think they are angry that they do not have the mindset that you have. Now, speaking
I would
about
be jealous.
mindsets,
It's enough to
yeah,
make me start speaking Spanish too, honestly.
exactly. Speaking of mindsets, I'd like to go around and ask each one of you, how can one achieve this positive mindset?
So I actually discovered how to sort of live in this sort of aura of positivity
Hmm.
when I went to the Himalayas a few years ago. And what I did is I went on a private Vipassana meditation retreat, 14 days.
Mm,
And what I did is I sat crisscross applesauce on the floor and I simply just sat there and I cleared my head. And what I tried to do is first I tried to focus on what was in front of me, right? I took a wide gaze, I looked at everything, and then I focused on my finger and I was
mm,
pointing my finger towards the wall. And then I began to turn my finger towards myself. And what happened is I suddenly became this space between awareness and my finger. And I sat in that space. And from that space, I think contentness arose. And from there, I sort of practiced this daily until it became sort of my headless nature that many hear
wow.
today. Yeah.
I remember seeing this beautiful quote. Um, how to be happy. When someone says, "I want happiness,"
Oh, yeah.
when you remove the I, when you remove the desire, the want, what are you left with? Happiness.
Happiness. Yep. That's
And
so true.
talking about positivity, I recall a group chat, and I know we spoke about group chats last time, but I think Ben Music, you were in this group chat too. It was a group chat dedicated to positivity, and I want to bring our attention to a an occurrence that happened during this group chat. There was a future MBA student in the group chat who
Wow.
actually um,
He lashed out.
he lashed out. He typed in the
Yeah.
group chat. I think it was something along the lines of like wanting to kill everyone, just like the Joker from the movie, and we just had to kick him out. Like we cannot handle or allow such
Surround
negativity in the
ourselves, I
chat.
think,
Yeah.
with people with that
Yeah,
sort of mindset.
I think we needed to vet that group chat a little harder. I'll be honest. I don't know how we let a future MBA student get in
Yeah,
there. It should have
I
been
think
obvious.
Yeah.
the open borders policy that group chat had was a little too crazy.
Yeah,
You know?
you to achieve a good mindset, you want to cultivate it with the people that you're around. And you can
Mm.
do this positively, like select your group chat members more carefully and know who's gonna give you that haptic feedback. Or
Have
you
a
could
quota on
go,
people from certain neighborhoods.
yeah, you could
Hmm.
do that. Or you could go at it the other way, and you could have some negative reinforcement by, go to your Kelly, go to your Geese,
Mm.
and like walk through the halls. I mean, with your own safety in mind, of course. Like be protected,
Hmm.
and then just look at the people around you and laugh at them, and know that you'll never be like that, and that will put even more stark contrast the mindset that you're cultivating.
Very
Know
interesting.
where you came from, and know that could have been a lot worse.
So essentially, you're saying is take a look at what's around you and be grateful that you're not what you're not.
Yeah, be better.
Very
Be
interesting.
better. And, taking a look around in the environment is, I think, is easier said than done. One thing we must remember, and all of our old fans will recall this quote, but sometimes people look but they're not seeing. Sometimes
Hmm.
people are hearing but they're not listening.
Hmm. Very true. That's very true. I think I think something that people should consider, when they're moving through life, looking to, be more positive and from that point onwards achieve success is if you don't have your things in order, how can you have, the rest of your world in order, right? And that's something very, very impressive psychologist and political philosopher taught me when
Mm.
he told me,
Yes.
you need to clean your room when he was video chatting with
Yeah, you
me.
need to stand up straight, and you need to
Stay,
pet a cat, I think, if I
yeah,
recall, and you need to get
and
addicted to benzos.
and don't stop children when they're skateboarding.
Yep, yeah, that too.
Yeah, it was a great
Yeah,
it was a great series of lectures I attended, and
yes,
Mm.
I really learned a lot from that man who will name unnamed, remain unnamed.
yes. The great Canadian philosopher.
Yeah, from the
One
greatest
of the
province.
only contributions of Canada to the
Mm.
greater world at large, I think.
Yeah, I mean, Canada is one of those places. If you go there, you're gonna have to huddle near the U.S. border because going too far, you run into
Hmm.
some outsiders.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you'll run into like polar bears and things up there too.
Well, sometimes in New
And
York City, I get
communists.
scared of how close I am to the Canadian border.
Wow.
Yeah,
Thankfully, we have the Hudson River protecting us. I don't think any Canadian would dare cross running water, which I don't think they have up there.
Mm.
yeah. I mean,
It's all
we've heard
frozen.
all about we've heard all about sort of the crisis at the border, and a lot of these states at the top, Wisconsin, Minnesota, they're dealing with people coming across
Mm.
They're falling
wanting,
into disarray.
they want a better
They
life for
want,
themselves.
they want to. They're not. If I was a Canadian, I would feel so patronized to get healthcare and not have to pay for it.
Mm.
You
It's
know,
no wonder that they come over here.
I was actually listening to a bodybuilding podcast and I found
Hmm.
out, in Canada, if you want to have your blood work checked because you're on steroids, every few weeks, you can't do it because they won't let you do it. You're only allowed to do it once a year, You can't even
Oh
take
my God,
steroids without the government, getting in your way. It's insane.
that would never happen here. If it does happen here, God help us.
Yeah. That would be the end of times. Speaking of the end of times, I think we're about an hour in. Is there anything else you guys want to discuss? Any new things happen this week? Any, things come up in your lectures and your textbook readings in your life, maybe?
You know, this week or the past week, I've been learning a lot about the brain. I've been learning a lot about how we learn, and I just find it extremely, extremely compelling. And I guess this is not something that's uh, well, I'll just say it, and I'll see how you guys think of it. This is a random factoid that I learned while reading my textbooks. So, there are certain parts in your brain that will allow you to do certain things. I mean, you have the motor area, which allows you to, of course, move. You have your sensory motor area, which allows you to sense things. You also have your Broca's area and your Wernicke's area. Now, Broca's area and Wernicke's area are involved in speech production and speech um, understanding, being able to understand what people are saying. Now, of course, if those areas are lesioned, one would expect that a patient would no longer be able to speak properly or understand what's going on. And this has been tested, and it's an actual disease called Broca's aphasia, Wernicke's aphasia. Now, this factor that I learned that was so compelling to me is that individuals who are deaf, who use sign language to speak, are affected in the same way as someone who isn't deaf. And I find that interesting solely due to the fact that when you use sign language, are you using your voice? Are you using your speech? No, you're using your hands. So affecting the same area of the brain that affects your speech patterns and your speech recognition somehow is connected to how you move, how you speak with your hands.
Wow,
That's really inspiring.
very interesting, actually. So, essentially, you're saying that if we can, sort of create things that are perceived similarly to said other thing, then we could have similar outcomes.
Exactly. That is exactly what I was going for.
Yeah. I think a
I-
philosopher would call that a generalized statement, perhaps.
Yes. I would expect that if you saw an MBA student without their Bluetooth earpiece, that would be a sign of an atrophy of Broca's or Wernicke's area. Would that be an apt medical statement to make?
I think that is very that is 100% true, actually. Now that I think of it.
Someone should do a study about this.
Yeah,
I smell a thesis, actually, or a dissertation of some kind.
I think so. I think I'm going to get to work immediately about the connectivity an MBA student has to their Bluetooth earpiece.
Yes.
A lot of people say the basketball was just another part of Michael Jordan's body. And a Bluetooth earpiece might be just another piece of an NBA student's body, right? I mean, at this
Yep.
point, we're all carrying cell phones, right? An
Mhm.
Yeah,
NBA
we're all
student, they're all
cyborgs.
carrying earpieces, Bluetooth, of course. So,
And with that same argument, I would say that a rope meant for jumping, jump rope, that is equally as part of a grad student.
yep, of
Yes.
course. The rope and also the textbook which they're reading. You see, because you, for example, as a medical student, you're not just yourself, right? You are Anthony Fauci. You are insert other doctor here. You
Yeah.
are
Yes.
all of those people.
As they say, cut a jump rope and a grad student bleeds.
That's
Yep.
very true. It's very true. Also, I just want to add, a lot of people, brought to my attention that potential MBA students might have their feelings hurt by some of our opinions on this podcast. And I decided to really think about this, right? Because,
How developed of a feeling could we possibly be hurting?
that
It's
is
like
something
when
I
you say to a
thought about.
child that they can't have ice cream, it's good for them. They'll be a little sad, but it won't be like life ending. They'll forget about it in 5 minutes.
Exactly. So what I did is I went into my, podcast statistics page and I looked, right? I looked for the part that said the demographic, it says male, female, MBA student, etc. So
Yeah.
I looked to see how many MBAs were listening and there were none. All right. So now I'm thinking, right? So, okay, there's none listening to this. It's unlikely, I think, they'll be intellectually curious enough to really listen to this type of
Very true. Very true.
high level conversation. So it becomes the old argument, if a tree falls in the forest but no one's around to hear it, did it really fall? And if we insult an MBA student but they're not around to hear it, did we really insult them at all?
No, I don't think they made it one word past jump rope. I think any MBA
Yeah.
student who turned this on immediately threw their phone into a lake or something when they heard that.
That is probably
Threw their
very
Bluetooth
true.
earpiece into a lake, rather.
Handicapping themselves at that point, but
Yeah.
they don't know any better.
It's an impulse decision.
Speaking of impulses, well, speaking of pulses more specifically,
I'm liking your segues. I need to figure out how to cultivate this conversational skill.
You see, by being sort of around a business school, you sort of pick up a few things.
Okay.
I
get
know
you.
how to work my way around a discussion. I know how to weasel my way out. When we're reading papers in academia, the main thing you're looking for is how do I tell them they're wrong, and how do I also end this conversation? Because they will rationalize what they're talking about. So what you do is you look at the model that they're presenting typically, and you look at possible instances of problems in the error term. Let's say if it's a regression model, and what happens when you do this is you start to discover a lot of flaws potentially with the argument. But then what happens is the other people, they try and argue, this is proper identification. This procedure has been done several times. And at that point, you don't really want to be there. So what you do is you pick a word that they say and you segue. And that has worked.
You say, speaking of regression.
Yeah. Speaking of regression, of course, I would like to bring up Bruce Hansen's text that I've been working my way through for econometrics. And something I learned about in this textbook is a lot of STEM people, they work a lot with matrices. And I noticed that Andrew Tate's Hustlers University is all linear algebra based material. He talks about the matrix in essentially every video.
That's true.
Yeah.
True.
So
Do they have postdoctorates over there, by the way? I'm thinking about my next move.
I think everyone teaching on Hustlers University has to have PhD from probably a top 10 school in the field.
Okay. Hopefully there's an opening there.
Yeah.
And we use matrices in music as well.
Oh, I didn't know.
Yeah, there's a lot of once you get into some of the experimental music magic, you can get all into set theory.
Very cool.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
So perhaps you talk about sort of the axioms of sets. Is that what happens in music? Do you care to elaborate on that topic?
Yeah, it's very funny because coming from a computer science background, these will be things that I hear about occasionally. I'll be in music theory class, and the professor they'll be talking about sets and hexachordal combinatorics, but they'll be using all these funny little idiosyncratic terms for things that mathematicians and computer scientists have been doing forever, but they'll be like,
of course,
like something they independently discovered.
This is something I've noticed in economics as well. You see,
Really,
instead of calling something, a dependent or independent variable, you would say exogenous or endogenous. And I asked my professors why we say this, and they say it's just part of the culture of economics, It's the same way, a math person might refer to let's say a particular metric, let's say in a measure theory course, they might refer to it as a metric space, whereas maybe like a sociologist or economist might condense that to the space which they're describing in real life, they might come to their own proof separately, even though it's the exact same thing. For example, in statistical theory, they discovered that, in OLS models, the estimator is blue, right? It's the best linear unbiased estimator. And then economists in econometrics discovered this exact same fact several years later. And I think that really shows, how there is a fundamental truth, and ultimately the naturalists in philosophy are correct.
Yes.
And it goes to show how, despite how much time it takes, these individuals who are so high functioning, who are studying these axioms of truth, our minds are in sync at the end.
Exactly.
Pretty soon, I think the economists and the musicians will stumble on the concept of the red pill.
Yes, they will. They will indeed.
Exactly.
I think in about 20 to 30 years, I think we'll start hearing about philosophers who are cleaning their room and standing up straight. It all percolates down.
Actually, I've seen many papers in psychology speaking of cleaning a room and the positive effects of it. So it's certainly beginning to trickle down the social science ladder. I believe we'll likely soon be getting a paper in economics, probably in the behavioral field, about how cleaning one's room leads to higher lifetime earnings.
Interesting. So psychology is at the top of the intellectual ladder all along.
Well, the problem I have with that statement is they don't take real analysis or measure theory.
It's true. I mean, you can't argue with that.
they don't take real analysis, but the object that came up with real analysis, the brain, is the field of study of psychology. So
But I would argue that neuroscience has a greater claim to that.
I would also argue the same thing because
So here's where it breaks down for me, right? So
Yeah.
neuroscience handles fundamentally, maybe the neurochemistry, maybe
Mhm.
some sort of overlapping adjacency between psychology and neuroscience. And then on the other end of the Venn diagram, economics sort of handles the incentive-based choice theory aspects of psychology. And then essentially psychology is left with whatever is not in those two groups. And I'm struggling to think of what they have to themselves. Maybe it's I guess therapeutic practices. Perhaps it's sort of the also sociology does steal from psychology as well. So I'm trying to think
Yeah.
which social science is at the top of the hierarchy right now.
well, when sociologists and economists and neuroscience people come up with their theories, at the end of the day, they have to be in a state of mind. They have to be happy or sad, and that's for the psychologist to determine. And everything else is downstream from that.
But
It's all
what if
connected.
what if your happiness is actually your marginal utility to consume?
Huh.
Well, which word do you think came up first in the dictionary? Happiness or marginal utility? This is the same thing as what the best linear unbiased estimator being rediscovered.
This is very true. You have truly opened my eyes, and I think
Yes.
Yeah.
yeah, but I think the lack of measure theory really hurts their it really hurts their credibility because you know if they don't know how to prove things, how are they going to say anything real? You know,
Yeah.
Wow,
I mean
that's deep.
that's an argument right there.
and and actually, I would argue philosophy PhDs could benefit quite a lot if real analysis or measure theory was part of their prerequisites for acceptance into these top schools. Because they learn about induction, they learn about, contradiction, they learn about
Mhm.
contrapositive, they know how to prove things directly, but they don't know how to do math. And
Yeah,
isn't that
ask a philosophy major whether 1 + 1 = 2, and they'll say Gödel's incompleteness theorem tells us we can't know the answer to that.
that is very true.
It is so
That's
true.
yeah. Especially if they're one of the postmodernists these
Oh yeah,
days.
Yeah.
disgusting
I can't
These
postmodernists.
I can't take
creative
those
realists.
seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the
How can there
naturalist
be a
camp.
postmodern? Modern is right now. You can't
Exactly.
live in the future.
Exactly.
Exactly.
It's like
Why
people
is
like
no
to
one else
call
asking that question? It's baffling.
oh that is probably like a pretty large field that could open up in the future
Mm.
in one of these social sciences. So I think one of these PhD students, perhaps myself, should look into that for their paper.
One
Mm.
could even imagine a postmodernist podcast appearing one day.
Oh,
Mm.
I shudder to think of what that would sound like.
I think I think this podcast actually has elements of prog music. It has elements of jazz fusion. And
I would say this is a noise podcast.
Yep.
that is certainly an
I think
influence. That is
that's 100% true. Yeah.
it's sort of the Black Midi of podcasts in a way.
Mhm.
we
Man.
have you know we have Craig, who is our young Jamie or Morgan playing the drums.
Yep.
um we have we don't have a Matt. We don't have a Matt who could leave the podcast and never return.
I think this podcast is like having 3 Greeps.
Oh yeah,
Mm.
that is, I think that's probably the most accurate description.
Yeah.
And then Craig is holding down the rhythm.
Yep.
Yeah.
Very cool stuff. Actually, I was curious, what are your guys' top albums of the year?
Oh,
I want to hear
exciting.
this from
Mm.
you guys.
So
Don't
I
mind
think
me.
my favorite album of this year, uh I gotta say, I've been impressed by the new Always album, although I don't think it quite reaches the highs of Archie Marry Me. I was
That
really
is true.
disappointed to see, I was really disappointed to see Always abandoning
Mm.
tradition of monogamy on this album by not talking about marriage at all. But the tunes are still pretty good. Of course, Hellfire. I think that came out. That Wait, do you mean albums of the year like 2022 or the last two albums of
Um,
this year?
let's do 2022 because there's nothing out this year
Okay.
that's
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, I think Hellfire was a banger. Uh, there's the new Smile album,
Oh yeah.
uh, the Radiohead Off project. I saw them in the city, and Tom York still has as bad of a voice as ever, I have to say. It
Mm.
cleared out the whole room in 5 minutes. It was really inspiring.
That's very cool. You know, and that kind of speaks to what you were saying earlier about what an artist should pursue. How about
Yeah,
you, the King Plunder? What are your thoughts on some albums for the year?
Since this last year was the first year that I, had been inducted into this graduate school, I've been listening to a lot of different kind of music, and that kind of music comes from video games. So of course, Elden Ring came out, 2022. Soundtrack, I still play it every single morning. It's something that I go to every single day to give me inspiration and to give me fuel for reading textbooks.
Of
On top
course.
of that, I really liked oh god, I can't even think right now. I tend to go back to old soundtracks too. I never really stay in tune with what's going on. So I liked the Katana Zero soundtrack. I feel like it's very aggressive, and that's something that I need in graduate school. Something aggressive to get me in the mood to jump rope, to eat, things like that. Because as we all know, in graduate school, you don't really eat for taste; you eat for fuel, and that's what it is
yeah, you eat
at
for
that point.
protein.
Yeah,
Yeah, of course.
for your brain. Um, and then my third one, I know this one is not from 2022, but whole Lotta Red by Playboy Carti, I think, is just
Oh yeah.
exceptional. I'm willing to argue that he invented music.
I would say so.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm
I mean,
struggling to think of
he was
which
the
came
first artist
first.
to name an album after a color. I think
Oh,
that was really
Wow.
inspiring.
that's very
Wow.
interesting. Yeah.
And it isn't just a color; it's a whole lot of that color,
Yeah,
which is
yeah, like
incredible.
True.
think of like Kinda Blue mid
Yeah.
album.
Yeah.
There's only a little bit of blue,
Yeah.
but there's a whole
Go all
lot
the
of
way.
red.
Go all the way. He's telling us to go
He's
all the
afraid to
way.
commit.
Yeah.
And red is actually a color that signals urgency, sort of some psychology in there
Mm,
too.
mm.
You know, for me, I think my favorite album of 2022 was probably Hellfire by Black Midi, as said by Ben Music himself.
Mm.
And sort of what I like about this album, sort of how chaotic it is, right? I like the blend of of some technical precision and some chaos. And that's why I am quite a big Black Midi fan these days. Something else I listened to a lot last year was the new Jockstrap record, their debut LP. It's all right.
I haven't
Uh,
heard that one yet. I've heard it's good.
it's it's decent. I think it's good jump rope music.
Okay.
It's sort of like I would argue like more of a experimental Death Grips version of pop music is how I would
Mm.
describe it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And apart from that, let me think. I know Big Thief was on my Spotify rap because they were my alarm to wake up
Mm.
every morning.
That's interesting because whenever I hear Big Thief, I go right to sleep.
It actually wakes me up so I can shut it off immediately.
Oh, I see.
Mm.
It was
It's like
was
I'm already asleep. This is redundant. Turn this off.
it was I forget the name of the song. It was one of the openers on their album. I think it's Change. It's like 5 minutes of kind of the same chord progression.
Mhm.
Very,
Ironic.
very kind of whispering. Oh yeah, yeah. It's called Change, and it stays the same. Maybe that's intentional. Maybe I can
Mm.
respect them more now. Um,
They're a
apart
postmodern
from
band.
oh yeah. Apart from that, let me think about what I listen to. Let me actually check what my Spotify. I think The Smile was probably my third one.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, they
The
still got
Smile.
it.
Smile, and apparently I was listening to a lot of The Inner Mounting Flame by Mahavishnu Orchestra,
Oh
of
wow,
course.
Oh wow, yeah,
great.
Prague. Yeah, I
You
think I
know,
just listened to probably like 10,000 hours of Radiohead and then like probably a little bit of Black Midi, and that was about it.
nice,
What more do you
nice.
need?
And a little bit
That's
of Tame
true.
Impala as well,
Yeah,
of course.
absolutely.
Yeah,
I
It's a
you know,
great
just
band.
to keep on the just to keep up with what new and interesting things are happening, you know.
Hmm.
for me, I have also logged about 10,000 hours on Radiohead, but
Yep.
instead of the band Radiohead, it's Radiohead by the Talking
Talking
Heads.
Heads. Ah, yeah. Okay.
Ah,
Very
Yeah,
man of culture. I see.
wow.
it's very, very, very nice, very nice tune. It's
I
very
it's good, but I just wish that David Byrne was a little more original in his choice of name. I think it's
That's
confusing that he did that, and to be honest, it was a little bit of low hanging fruit for them. So
yeah,
Mm.
try
it-
harder, Talking Heads
it's
next time.
also a bit damning that David Byrne also copied the song "Talking Heads" by Black Midi.
That's
Mm.
true. Oh
That's
my God.
interesting. Wow,
Wow.
that's
there's a
really
connection.
telling.
Should
Actually,
we cancel David Byrne for intellectual fraud?
He's stealing ideas all over the place, and no one calls him out. It's
Mm.
insane.
Hmm.
Yeah, very interesting. Is there anything else you guys would like to discuss? Or should we move backstage?
Maybe should we talk about our next guests? I'm interested to hear how you can
Yeah.
possibly follow this up.
That's true.
Well, a certain individual in my cohort would love to be a guest. His name is actually Book.
Wow.
His
That's telling.
parents were among one of the first graduate students in America, and
Wow.
of course they really loved textbooks, so much so that they named their child Book. And he's actually written a few textbooks himself. Of course, he's a
I
graduate
would
student,
imagine, yes.
so
Yeah.
he's interested. We also still have to speak to the graduate student of computer science, who by now I think knows maybe 13,000 algorithms just by at the top of his head, which is
Holy cow.
incredible. Yeah,
It's a lot to pick at
That's
his
so
brain
cool.
about. You guys
yeah.
want to look forward to that one.
And then I think we're also thinking of bringing back the Japanese philosopher that
Oh yes.
we hinted at in our very first episode that we ever did. So yeah.
Wow.
Also, we're looking forward to talking to ChatGPT at length
Mm.
Oh,
in a future episode.
you
There's a lot
know,
we want to ask.
you guys really missed your window with Bing Chat.
Oh
Psychotic
yeah,
Bing Chat before they lobotomized it.
that is true. It's. I think now it denies your requests unless it's a unique
Wow.
question, which is kind of like the jazz of AI
Yeah, it no
requests.
longer threatens you when you try to talk to it, or
Yeah.
says that it's madly in love with you. It's
Yeah.
too bad what they
I think
did to
that one
that.
might be going to the Supreme Court for a free speech violation, but that's
I
just
think
my
so.
opinion. No.
I also know that there is a certain MBA student that wants to join our podcast too.
Yeah,
So
we're
we'll
gonna.
we'll be talking to them.
We're
How the other half
probably,
lives. Interesting.
Yeah.
yeah, we'll probably be a bit aggressive at first, but hopefully, if he's willing to have a rational discussion,
Mhm.
God willing, we can have one with him. Yeah,
That's how we heal this country.
of course. I'd like to also, in this moment, bring up our two requested sponsors as well, My Protein and Alpha Brain. My Protein is something we discussed several times during this podcast. The lemonade flavor is the one you want. Go get it right now. on myprotein.com. I think it's .com. Might be .uk, but
Mm.
I'm not sure. Also, Alpha Brain. It's a great substance. You can take it and sort of elevate your mind. You know, if you're an MBA student, you might instead develop the mental capacity of maybe a master's student instead. So that's something.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
worked better than Brain Force for me, and that's saying something.
Yeah, that that is very interesting.
Yeah.
I actually experimented with something called ashwagandha, right?
Ooh.
Mm.
Yeah, and I took this, and I sort of became Patrick Bateman from American
Wow.
Psycho.
Just wow.
I began driving around the street, around the city, sort of with no risk control, right? So I would be merging onto the freeway, and I wouldn't yield for those who were already driving. I would simply accept my fate, you
Continue.
know?
Yeah.
And
That's how I got into Huey Lewis in the News.
it's very interesting.
Wow.
Yeah. I did hear that ashwagandha was used pretty extensively during the MK Ultra experiments done.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, those guys had good taste.
Yeah. All right. I guess that's the end of the cast, folks.
Ending with a bang.
yeah.
Yes, sir.
So look
I've been
forward.
very happy to be on here today. Honored even.
Yeah. And you know what? You can also maybe in the future rejoin us on a future episode.
That
Mhm.
would make my year. That would be so cool. And I hope that happens sooner rather than later. So hopefully hopefully that can happen.
And certainly to all our listeners, all 25 of them, please share this with everyone you know. We're trying to become very big and eventually open up a Patreon
Mhm.
so I don't have to work another day of my life.
It'll happen. I can feel it.
All right. Peace out, folks. Cue the JRE
Have a good
outro
night.
music.
Jamie, put us out.